most mushrooms that are poisonous will just give you a headache or make you throw up. It's rare that a species will actually kill you. The death cap is one of those.
I'm devastated. I love them.
This investigation has been subject to incredibly intense levels of public scrutiny and curiosity.
Yeah, the Australian mushroom poisoning fatalities made headlines far beyond the sleepy Aussie town in which they happened.
Another twist in the poison mushroom case.
Did you eat the same meal now?
I cannot think of another investigation that has generated this level of media and public interest, not only here in Victoria, but also nationally and internationally.
But the bigger story is that death caps are becoming more of a global species, and how it's affecting the larger ecosystem is still a bit of a mystery.
In smaller communities such as Leongatha and Curramborough, a tragedy such as this can reverberate for years to come. These are three people who, by all accounts, were much beloved in their communities and are greatly missed by their loved ones.
Yes, I say I didn't do anything. I love them.
Everything you're about to see in this video contains a certain degree of speculation, so take everything you see in this video and hear with a grain of salt. Before I get into the case at hand, I want to talk about two other women. I want to talk about Susan Smith and Lindy Chamberlain. Now, I know you already sat through a montage and you want me to get on with the mushroom case.
The eating of an orange is a lot like a good marriage. Just eat the damn oranges!
If you really have to, you can click on the timestamps below to click to the next chapter, but I encourage you to stay for the whole thing. If you're still watching this, it means you didn't click ahead, and I would like to personally thank you. Now, when I said I wanted to cover this case a few weeks ago, I thought it would be done in a similar fashion to my other videos. You know, I would sew in a few memes, add a few jokes, and Bob's your uncle, you'd have another fly video. But as time got closer to actually making the video, the less comfortable I became with taking this approach. You know, when I'm making fun of an actress who is using questionable tactics to promote a book, or a overindulged child star, the stakes, they're considerably lower. But in this case, people have died, families have been torn apart, and there is a woman who will be potentially looking down the barrel of a life sentence. There are actual consequences here, and the stakes are legitimately high. Now, while this next bit of the video might feel like a tangent, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Let's start by talking about Susan Smith. Now, in 1994, a woman named Susan Smith arrived on the doorstep of a stranger, and she was frantic. She had been carjacked, and her two sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander, were trapped in the back seat of the car. The town of Union, where she was from, they swung into action. They did everything they could do to help her. They even started selling yellow ribbons as a sign of solidarity. The national press rushed to the town to highlight the case. Susan and her husband David, they held press conferences to help get the word out.
I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything but think about them.
The police, they focused all of their resources on the case. They held nationwide search parties, and they even set up a hotline for any potential tips or clues in the case. In addition, they sat down with Suzanne and they did a composite sketch, and this is what they came up with. It was an unknown black man who was anywhere between 5'9" and 6 foot tall. And the police, they felt like they were looking for a needle in a haystack.
Discussion started right away about that composite and how vague it was and how it described half the people in Colombia, and should we use it and what should be done. And eventually we pulled it off the air.
Just 9 days after the boys initially disappeared, this happened.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
Suzanne Smith had lied. There was no carjacking. She had taken the boys to a lake, gotten out of the car, pulled the handbrake, and allowed the car to slowly submerge into the murky waters where the boys were trapped inside. After her confession, investigators went back to the lake and retrieved the vehicle with the boys' decomposing bodies still inside. After the truth became public, police acknowledged that they had pretty much pinned Susan as a potential suspect right from the very beginning of this case. And some people in the public, along with some people in the press, had carried these same suspicions.
It hurts to know that that I would be accused or even thought that I would ever do anything to harm my children.
However, there were many people, particularly those in Susan's own town, who were legitimately shocked by the case, and not only that, they were furious.
You need to cry!
And if you don't believe me, let's play back that footage that I played you a little earlier.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection.
Listen to the collective gasps in that crowd. There were people in that crowd that until that very moment were absolute supporters of Susan. They were absolutely convinced that she had been the victim in a terrible crime. And those gasps are the precise moment when that faith is shattered. Of course, not everyone was as surprised.
Blaming on the black man is a shame. I mean, to fabricate a whole picture and everything. The picture's nationwide.
I'm not really angry. I'm hurt.
Now, Susan Smith remains in prison to this day. However, she will be eligible for parole in November 2024. How crazy is that? Now, let's talk about Lindy Chamberlain, a very different but very similar case. Now, the Lindy Chamberlain case is an extremely complex one with a deep and complicated history. What I'll be providing here today is a very general overview of the case, since it's not the main topic of this video. But if you want to, I encourage you to check out the links I've provided below and do your own research at the same time. Now, in August 1980, a woman named Lindy Chamberlain went camping in Uluru with her family, and this included her 2-month-old daughter, Azaria Chamberlain. On the night of August 17th, Lindy went back to check on Azaria, who had been sleeping in the tent, only to discover a dingo at the entrance of the tent with a small bundle in its mouth. Now, the dingo quickly disappeared into the night, and Lindy observed that Azaria was missing and that there was blood in the tent. Now, what followed was a massive search party with no positive outcomes. A week after her disappearance, Azaria's bloody jumpsuit was discovered not far from the campsite. But one pivotal aspect had everyone's attention at the time, and that was Azaria's matinee jacket, the one she had been allegedly wearing at the time of the incident. Now, people thought it was odd that the dingo had the capacity to remove a jacket as well as a jumpsuit while barely tearing the fabric that the child had been wearing. Not to mention the jacket was nowhere to be found. Lindy, she offered this explanation.
They use their feet like hands and pull back the skin as they go, and they'll just peel it like an orange.
So by this stage, the case was getting worldwide attention, and Lindy's behaviour seemed cold and aloof. An initial inquest, which was held from December 1980 to February 1981, found that neither Lindy nor her husband Michael were implicated in the disappearance of Azaria.
To stem the tide of rumor, the coroner took the decision to announce his findings on live television, instructing the nation that the Chamberlains were not responsible for their daughter's death.
Do you have any comment?
What are your plans now for the future?
Try and live normal lives.
However, the next year a second inquest was held, and this included a trial complete with a jury. Now, the prosecution had a few key pieces of evidence to support their case. One of the biggest pieces of evidence that the prosecution presented was that dried blood was found underneath the dashboard of the vehicle they'd been driving. And it's important to note that the blood was discovered during a subsequent investigation, 18 months after the actual incident occurred. In addition, their examination of Azaria's jumpsuit found that there was no trace of animal saliva. However, there could have been saliva on the matinee jacket except the matinee jacket was nowhere to be found.
After examining the baby's blood-stained clothing, Professor Cameron concluded the child's throat had been cut and said special ultraviolet fluorescent photography had revealed a small handprint in blood on the baby's jumpsuit.
So there was no way the defence could prove this and rule the Chamberlains out. Now, the Crown's case was that Lindy murdered Azaria and that her husband, Michael, was an accessory after the fact. There was no clear motive, but there was a lot of speculation from the general public at the time. Some even speculated that the Chamberlains had discovered that Azaria would have a severe lifelong disability, and so they killed her because they didn't want to look after her.
People are saying that she was a spastic baby or a cretin. Others are saying that she was a sickly baby and that this was a good way to get rid of her.
It should be said that there's actually no evidence whatsoever to support this theory. No medical records or anything to indicate that there's any truth to this rumour. Now, the prosecution's case was laid out with the following sequence. Now, this is where you need to pay attention. On the night of August 17th, Lindy leaves the barbecue area where the other campers are. Keep in mind, this isn't just her family. This is a mix of tourists and other campers. She returns to the tent with her son, Aiden. She puts on her tracksuit pants, takes Azaria from the tent to the family car, cuts Azaria's throat with a pair of scissors, hides the body in a camera bag, cleans up some of the blood on herself as well as the car. We'll be getting back to this, believe me. Then she cuts Azaria's clothing to make it look like dingo teeth marks. Now, she removes her tracksuit pants, she finds a can of baked beans for her son Aiden, and she returns to the tent again. Now, she enters the tent, leaving spots of blood to create the impression that a dingo has been in there to snatch the baby. Then she collects Aiden, returns to the barbecue area with the other campers. She then goes back to the tent to supposedly check on Azaria, and alerts everyone that a dingo has snatched Azaria. The camp commences an unsuccessful search party, and somewhere in amongst all of that, she gets Michael to help her dispose of the body and the bloody clothes. Also, you have to keep in mind that at some stage, she's going to plant the clothes somewhere where they can be found to make it seem like they were discarded by the dingo. Did I mention that the Crown alleged that this happened within a 10-minute time frame, and with her 6-year-old son Aiden either not seeing any of it, or if he did see it, not saying a word about it? And looking at this sequence in black and white, it doesn't really make sense. Why would she risk doing this crime in front of her son? How did she manage to do such a good job cleaning up the blood that it didn't arouse notice or suspicion? How did she dispose of her bloody clothes and any other materials she used to clean the car without anyone noticing? And how did she do all of this within such a short time frame? People couldn't wrap their mind around this idea that a dingo could violently intrude a tent and stalk a small infant baby like it was prey. Because if we know anything about Australia, it's that we're absolutely known for how cute, cuddly and harmless our wildlife are.
He's getting mad that I'm trying to pet him. Okay, yeah, I'm done.
Lindy was convicted to a sentence of life in prison and hard labour, and her husband was given a much shorter sentence of being an accessory after the fact so that he could look after the children when he got out of prison.
The deficiencies in the Crown case: no motive, no confession, no weapon, no body, no witness, just the disappearance of a child.
It was during her time in prison that she would give birth to a fourth child, a second daughter.
It's believed she was separated from the baby within an hour of the birth.
Now, in 1986, while the police are out searching for the body of a missing backpacker they think was trying to scale the rock, they discover the infamous matinee jacket, and it was buried in some shrubland not far from where a dingo den was. The jacket would undergo forensic examination, and ultimately this was the big piece of evidence that would exonerate Lindy Chamberlain, because this proved she was telling the truth, and they were able to tell and deduce, because it was near a dingo's den and it had saliva traces on it, that it in fact aligned with the story she had provided all along. So at this point, Lindy Chamberlain has spent 3 years in prison. She's been separated from her husband and her 2 boys and her newborn daughter shortly after she was born. Her reputation has been irrevocably damaged, and she's never been able to really grieve the loss of her daughter, not properly. The loss and suffering that she and her family have gone through will be reduced to a singular catchphrase that will be a source of ridicule for decades to come.
Dingo's got my baby.
And I'm sure you've made the line call, Dingo got my baby. Dingo got my baby.
Carter, the dingo ate your baby. You do it. The dingo's got your baby.
A dingo ate my baby.
A dingo ate my baby.
Maybe the dingo ate your baby. What? The dingo ate your baby.
I'm sorry, a dingo ate your baby.
You know that's a true story. Lady lost a kid. You about to cross some fucking lines.
Now, in both of these cases, there was an overwhelming degree of attention and speculation. And there was a whirl of media attention before, during, and after each of these women's trials. In one instance, the media speculation was validated and the woman turned out to be guilty. But the other case is a damning reminder of what trial by media can really do when it comes to damaging a person's innocence. So in a 1984 poll, 76.8% of Australians said Lindy Chamberlain was guilty. And still to this day, there are people who think that Lindy Chamberlain is guilty. And when you ask them why they think this, they will cite evidence that has been disproven irrefutably.
That inquiry found that the damage to the jumpsuit was consistent with a dingo attack, and that the handprint on the jumpsuit was nothing more than red desert sand.
So whenever I'm preparing new content, I like to discuss it with my friends over coffee. You know, they'll ask me, what are you up to? What are you doing? And I'll tell them. So I was telling them about this case and how I was going to tie it into some past case studies. One of my friends said, what about the blood in the car? Surely that proves her guilt. Well, let me tell you about that blood in the car. It wasn't blood. It wasn't even human. It was sound dampening fluid used for the car itself.
The blood spatter on the underside of the dashboard turned out to be sound deadening compound. Other spots were most likely sweetened milk or a fruit drink.
And that was arguably the Crown's biggest piece of evidence. That was what a lot of it hinged on. I discussed it with another friend and presented the same degrees of evidence, and we just couldn't agree. I could not convince this guy that she was innocent. I considered this guy like a good friend, very sensible. I could not convince him that she was falsely convicted, even with all the evidence I presented to him. Even though he admitted by his own words that he really didn't know much about this case, he was still adamant that she was guilty. So this kind of proves my point, this power of trial by media. Then I discussed it with a third friend, and she said that she thought Lindy was innocent, but she took a really long pause before she gave her answer. And it's important to note, right, that Lindy's name has been cleared in every possible way a name can be cleared. She's been cleared by the legal system. She's been cleared by forensic evidence. They even published a new death certificate for her daughter Azaria, confirming yes, it was death by dingo. Every possible way this woman's name could be cleared, it has been cleared, and still to this day, she faces her skeptics.
You have been pardoned, you've been exonerated, you've been compensated. Why did you have to keep pushing for the result you had today?
Well, it was always unfinished business. While you have an open finding, it can always be opened at any stage. And there were so many misconceptions and rumours, and even today, and yesterday, stuff in the paper from people who purportedly should know what's happening, saying, oh yeah, but there was always this point or there was always that point. And I celebrate the final triumph of truth. But I don't celebrate her death, and the two are so intertwined. I have no idea what I feel about that.
So how does this all relate to Erin Patterson? And I can already feel you shouting at me, Fly, are you going to try and tell me that she's innocent and this is all a case of trial by media? Not exactly. That's not where I'm going with this. But I did decide that if I was going to cover this case, I had a responsibility to remind viewers that trial by media is a thing. Now, trials like this happen across the world every day, but only a handful get into the cultural zeitgeist like this. Only a handful capture people's attention and imaginations on this scale. So this case is unique in that respect. And the small town factor does not help this case. It just doesn't. I don't care what you say. When there is a case that is crudely credited as putting a town on the map, which this one is already being, there are going to be people out there who want to brag about their 6 degrees of separation.
I was a little bit scared, mortified, like what parent would let a kid draw on this wall?
In the short time that I've been preparing for this video, I've encountered several people who know a person who know a person who knows Erin Patterson. It's really big down here and everyone wants to laugh and joke and tell a story about how they know someone connected to the case, however innocuously. And some of the stories are just brain dead stupid. They are really, really stupid and really absurd.
I was a little bit scared, mortified, like what parent would let a kid draw on this wall?
But for example, I've heard one case of one person who owns a small farming business where they sell mushrooms in that town and they can't sell their product anymore. They have to outsource their product from that town because nobody wants to buy mushrooms. And that's the case I'm making here, is that every so often with cases like this, it has this bizarre domino effect that loses all perspective on whatever the incident at hand is. And I'm just encouraging you to keep that in the back of your mind. Let's go down a timeline of the case. Now, on July 29th, then 48-year-old Erin Patterson decides to host a lunch for some guests. The 4 guests included are Ian Wilkinson, his wife Heather Wilkinson, along with her in-laws Don and Gail Patterson. The lunch was held at her Leongatha home. Leongatha, it's a small town, 83 miles or 133 kilometres outside of the city of Melbourne, and it's got a modest population of just under 6,000. Now, Erin's estranged husband Simon Patterson was also meant to be at the lunch that day, but he pulled out at the last minute, and the reasons as to why this is just a source of speculation for many. Now, I also want to mention that the exact status of Erin and Simon's marriage is a thing of dispute itself. In some reports, Simon is listed as her ex-husband. In other reports, he is listed as merely her estranged husband. However, the most reliable source I was able to come up with was from a press statement held by Detective Inspector Dean Thomas. He said, quote, "The woman was separated from her husband, but police have been told the relationship is amicable." Now, Erin and Simon, they have 2 children, a son and a daughter. However, they were not at the lunch that day, and Erin has stated that the children were at the movies the day the lunch occurred. We'll get more into that later. So later on that day, Erin serves her guest a homemade beef Wellington. Now, it's not fully known what happened during the lunch, but by Erin's account, everything went fine and it was fairly uneventful. Now, by July 30th, all 4 of Erin's guests are sent to Leongatha Hospital with symptoms that resemble severe food poisoning. On July 30th as well, Erin reportedly attends the hospital with mild symptoms. Now, Erin has stated that she was transferred to Monash Medical Centre and received a liver treatment drug for her symptoms. This one point, it's been a source of speculation for many since this is based on Erin's own account of the events. However, reports including this one from the ABC align with Erin's version of events. Quote, "The Gippsland Southern Health Service confirmed a 5th person who presented at Leongatha Hospital on July 30th with suspected food poisoning later returned and was sent to Monash. On August 4th, Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson both die in the intensive care unit. and Victoria Police formally launch an investigation, and Erin's food hydrator is discovered at the local tip. For those of you who don't know, a tip is just another word for dump. Now, it has been widely speculated that Erin uses food dehydrator to prepare the food. But I'll get more into this later. On August 5th, Don Patterson dies in the ICU, one day after his wife, Gail. So Victoria Police escalate their investigation by searching Erin Patterson's home. At this point, I would like to remind you that 3 out of the 5 people who attended Erin's lunch are now deceased, with 2 sole survivors. That is Ian Wilkinson, the local pastor, and Erin Patterson herself. Now, needless to say, this is garnering a lot of press attention by this stage, and there are a lot of local and national press outlets that are congregating on the Leongatha town front to investigate the scene and investigate the situation. And this is when Erin gives an impromptu press conference that is now pretty infamous, and chances are you've seen it. So check it out.
What's happened? Can you tell us about the meal that you cooked?
I'm so devastated by what's happened, by the loss of Don. Don is still in hospital. The loss of Ian and Heather.
What was that?
And Gail.
There you go.
They were some of the best people that I've ever met. Gail was like...
Take your time.
Gail was the mum that I didn't have because my mum passed away 4 years ago. And Gail's never been anything but good and kind to me. And Ian and Heather were some of the best people I've ever met. They never did anything wrong to me, and I'm so devastated about what's happened.
Can you tell us
and the loss to the community and to the families and to my own children who've lost their grandmother.
Can you tell us a bit more about the lunch?
It's that I just can't fathom what has happened. I just can't fathom what has happened. That Ian and Heather have lost their lives, and Gail has lost her life, and Donna's still in hospital. No. Donna's still in hospital. No. And I pray that he pulls through because my children love him.
And you must be pretty shaken up by this as well.
I'm devastated. I love them.
How are you
I just can't believe it. Just can't believe it.
Can you tell us where the mushrooms came from? Police say you're a suspect. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, I say I didn't do anything. I love them. And I'm devastated that they're gone. And I hope with every fibre of my being that Don pulls through.
What the hell is wrong with you? We're a family!
That's
where
what I
do the
have to
mushrooms
say.
come from? Were they picked by you, or where did they come from, Mary? Can you tell us? What meal did you cook them? Did you eat the same meal, Mary?
By August 9th, police start to gather CCTV police footage they believe is relevant to the case, and they are also interviewing Erin's neighbours. They also conduct a second search of the tip where they found Erin's discarded food processor. And from what I could gather, nothing of what they may or may not have discovered during these subsequent searches has been disclosed to the press. So at this point, anything related to that is pure speculation. Now, on the same day, police confirmed that Erin did provide them with an unsigned police statement, and this will become relevant as I explore this further down the line, so stay with me here. Within this statement, along with providing some of the information that I've already mentioned, she states that she purchased the mushrooms from an Asian grocer. She also states that she cannot recall the name of the grocer. The statement to the police also followed an interview with the police in which Erin initially provided no common answers. On August 31st, a memorial service is held for Don and Gail Patterson, and Simon is seen in attendance. During the memorial service, Simon reveals the final words of his mother, which was shared in a group chat, which was lots of love to you all. Now, he also reveals that his father Don did receive a failed liver transplant prior to his death. On September 23rd, Ian Wilkinson is finally released from hospital. Ian is still frail and recovering at this point, and this is apparent when he attends the memorial service for his wife, Heather, on October the 4th. Then, for almost a month, the case goes quiet and we get no word. Then on November 2nd, Erin Patterson is arrested at her home and taken to Wonthaggi police station. That day, Victoria Police attended her property with technology detector dogs. It's been reported that they were searching and seizing tech devices such as USB sticks and SIM cards. Now, Erin Patterson was presented at court the next day where she received a total of 8 charges. Her trial is scheduled for May 2024. And if you're wondering how she ended up with this many charges, then there's more to this case than you realize. This is where we need to take a closer look at Simon Patterson. Simon Patterson was supposed to attend that lunch back in July. So hypothetically, if Erin's intention was to poison her guests, it would make Simon one of the targets at the table. That brings us up to 5 charges. That is 3 charges of murder and 2 charges of attempted murder. But what about the other 3 charges? Now, while we don't have exact concrete answers on the status of Erin and Simon's relationship, we do know that Simon visited Erin's home on exactly 3 occasions. These visits occurred around the following dates: November 16th to November 17th, 2021, between May 25th and May 27th, 2022, and September 6th, 2022. We know this because on all 3 of these occasions, Simon became ill. He became very ill. In May 2022, following one of these visits, Simon ended up in the intensive care unit where he was in an induced coma for 16 days. He also had to receive multiple surgeries for an undetermined illness. Following his release, Simon wrote the following statement on his Facebook page. Now, with these 3 additional illnesses, this brings 3 more charges of attempted murder, which brings Erin Patterson's total charge sheet to 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. Now that we've looked at the overall rundown of the case, I want to look at some of the more fringe aspects of the case that the media has paid attention to. Alright, so folks, this is where we're finally back. I have had to film this over several breaks because my battery died halfway through making this. I have the shittest battery life in the world. But here we go, we're nearing the end. This is where I have to start to tread very lightly with this case because this is where we get into some pretty speculative, pretty murky waters. So if I were you, I would grab your margarita because you need to take everything you see and hear from this video here on in with a grain of salt. Oh my gosh, so much salt. Now, exploring the media saturation that surrounds this case, it's easy to get lost up in rumour and blur the line where rumour ends and the truth begins. For instance, why was Erin hosting a lunch to begin with? It's been suggested that the reason the lunch was being hosted was an attempt to reconcile the Pattersons' marriage, and that Ian was there to act as a sort of mediator between the two. But then, if this is the case, why go ahead with the lunch if Simon pulled out at the last minute? Then, according to other reports, Erin has stated that she actually nursed Simon back to health during his recovery in May 2022, and that experience reinforced that she didn't want to get back with Simon at all and that she had told him this. Other reports seem to suggest that custody might have been a motivating factor in all of this. According to the statement that Erin provided to the police, she'd been having a conversation with Simon at the time she was at the hospital visiting her in-laws. According to the statement, the family were at the hospital and Miss Patterson was discussing the food hydrator with her children. "Is that what you used to poison them?" Miss Patterson's estranged husband Simon Patterson reportedly asked. Worried she might lose custody of their children, Miss Patterson said she decided to dispose of the kitchen appliance. And there's one other aspect of this case that I haven't quite touched on yet. At the same time, even though I'm reluctant to touch on it, I feel that I need to address it because if I don't, my comment section will just blow up. So a lot of people are making a big deal of this detail.
Mushroom case. Disturbing drawings on the wall of a home formerly owned by the woman who served the deadly meal have emerged. As Gillian Lantouris reports, a local tradie employed to paint the house made the discovery.
I am dead. No, I am really dead. That's just one example of the macabre scribble on the kitchen wall of Erin Patterson's former Corumburra home.
I was a little bit scared, mortified. What parent would let a kid draw on this wall?
The 48-year-old, who police say is a suspect in the poison mushroom case, lived in the Shalcott Road home with her now estranged husband, Simon, and their 2 kids. This local tradie was asked to paint over the disturbing images last year when the property went up for sale.
Now, tombstones down the bottom sort of done it for me. Yeah, like rest in peace grandma and rest in peace me and all that.
The painter says detectives have asked him for the images. It's yet another bizarre twist in this case.
In the press and in a lot of podcasts, it's referred to as Erin Patterson's Wall of Death. When I was getting ready for this project, one of my friends said to me, "Are you going to talk about the wall? Are you going to talk about the graffiti on the wall? You have to talk about the wall." And after looking into it, I'm not so sure that it really is relevant at all. While I think there are a lot of aspects of this case that require further exploration and more questions, I'm not sure that this is one of these. And let me play devil's advocate, because I do think this is a pretty good example of salacious journalism. Remember when I said that in a small town case like this, there are always going to be people who want to exploit their 15 minutes of fame? This is a perfect example of just this phenomenon. And I hate this tradie. I'm sorry, I do. I hate him. So at this point you might be asking yourself, Fly, what about the bit where it says rest in peace grandma and rest in peace granddad? Well, even here, I don't know that this is a big case to go on, because don't forget that Erin Patterson herself has 2 deceased parents, one who died in 2009 and one who died of cancer in 2019. This could just be the children's weird way of processing their maternal grandparents' deaths. And don't forget, this all occurred months before the incident in July. So again, it feels very speculative.
What parent would let a kid draw on this wall?
I'm not saying this is proof that she's innocent. I'm saying that there are so many other strange aspects to this case that, in the grand scheme of this thing, this is kind of a nothing burger. Like, I don't think this will necessarily go anywhere. And I hate this fucking tradie.
Now, tombstones down the bottom sort of done it for me.
There are more than a few loose ends that we need to tie up with this case, and we're not going to do them in this video, but I do think there are questions worth asking. Like, why were her symptoms so much milder than her other guests? And how did a standard liver treatment work on a particular strain of mushroom that has no known treatment available today? And why did Erin Patterson lie about discarding the food hydrator? Initially, she stated that she threw away the food hydrator months ago, but only later she admitted to throwing it away after her husband confronted her at the hospital. She also lied about where her children were. So she reported that her children were initially at the house during the lunch. But later, in the statement that she provided to police, she said that they went to the movies and had the leftovers the following day with the mushroom scraped off. And even her story about the mushrooms is something of a mystery. For example, why can't she at least recall the location of the Asian grocer where she purchased the mushrooms? And why throw away a food hydrator but provide a sample of the beef Wellington to the hospital where she checked in? And why haven't we been able to see those results yet? And then there's the beef Wellington, which is a difficult dish to make. This case is so insane it has me looking up Gordon Ramsay recipes. It requires you to puree the mushrooms into a paste. And you can't just flick off the mushrooms. It's a paste that coats the actual beef. There's no guarantee that even after she's scraped off the mushroom, that the leftovers she served her children would be safe to eat. Another question is, why didn't she take her children to the same hospital to have a routine checkup after they ate the mushroom? Why would you take any risk of the poisonous juices seeping into the beef itself and being consumed by the children? Why take any of this risk? Also, don't forget that a lot of these details that Erin clarified were in a statement that she left unsigned. So why and how did this happen? Was it just an error on her part made under duress? Or was it tactical? It's worth noting that because the statement was left unsigned, it may not be admissible in a court of law.
The acting chief commissioner says the written explanation Erin Patterson gave her lawyers was not a formal police statement, and inquiries continue.
I understand the interest and the desire to have more information about this. We're working with the health department and we will take as much time as needed to understand what's occurred.
Look, we're coming to the end of this video and I feel like I could have gone on and on. This has been an exhausting process. But ultimately, I don't want to go so far down the rabbit hole to the point where I lose all perspective on this case. You might be watching this and think that there are aspects that I left out. You know, there's a lot of details surrounding this case that ultimately, to me, feels irrelevant. So a classic example or case in point where things that have no relevance to this case have somehow leaked their way into the media is the incident where one person who worked with Erin Patterson like 20 years ago said that she was cunning and genius-like and able to wrap men around her little finger. I mean, who cares? This has nothing to do with the tragedy at hand. That being said, I tried my best to look at this case from every possible angle, even the points that is somewhat speculative. This woman, technically speaking, hasn't even had her day in court yet. And they have to select a jury, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they do that with a case that has had this much coverage. I haven't encountered a single person who hasn't heard of this case, who doesn't have an opinion. And I don't think I've encountered one person that has a good opinion of Erin Patterson, because she might be another Susan Smith, but she might. She just might, however small a chance it is, be another Lindy Chamberlain.